I want to return now to our top story this afternoon, and we have been covering reaction to the controversial Donald Trump overnight tweets in conversation now with Marian Tupy from the Cato Institute in the United States that has certainly become part of this particular story. Mr. Tupy, good afternoon to you, South African time. Maybe just as a point of clarity, you could tell us exactly what the Cato Institute does and what political line you toe.
We are a classical liberal think tank. We advocate in favor of market economy, liberal democracy, limited government, the rule of law, and protection of property rights.
Now, as far as the South African land issue is concerned, and as I mentioned in my introduction, you are now part and parcel of that debate, to the best of my knowledge. How have you been researching this?
Well, I've been writing about South Africa and Zimbabwe for the last 16 years. My articles have appeared in Washington Post, in Wall Street Journal, in Financial Times, and so on and so forth.
And you would believe that this country is getting it wrong as far as the land expropriation debate is concerned without compensation. Why is that?
Well, because taking away people's property without compensation has led to catastrophe every time it was tried. It was tried in Soviet Russia. It resulted in millions of people dead. It was tried in communist China. It was tried in Cambodia. And more recently, it was tried in Zimbabwe. And I don't think I need to remind your audience how that ended.
But you would also concede that in South Africa there is massive inequality when it comes to land ownership, isn't there?
And you have policies and legal measures in place to address that through compensation and restitution of the people who were wronged under apartheid, just as it should be, which is to say that people who have been wronged can be compensated financially or via land, which is bought from private owners on the basis of willing seller, willing buyer.
Mr. Tupy, is it your belief, the Cato Institute's belief, that the South African Constitution has changed in order to facilitate land expropriation without compensation?
No, and I've never claimed that. I've never claimed that it has changed. I'm talking about the potential for change, which is being debated. And I thought it was very important to note that under the treaties and laws which govern economic relationship between South Africa and the rest of the world, and also trading relationship between the United States and South Africa, it is expected that South African government will respect property rights of South Africans, regardless of the color of their skin.
So if that is your stated position, you'll also concede then that Fox News got it wrong last night when it claimed that the Constitution of this country had been changed in that respect, because that is patently erroneous, isn't it?
Yes, of course. I mean, the Constitution hasn't been changed. My argument and the articles that I have written in the last week pertained to the possibility of the change. And just as you would when you see a friend and somebody you care about heading in the wrong direction, you try to convince them not to do that. And I'm very hopeful that the government will reverse itself and will not proceed with expropriation without compensation, because it would have catastrophic consequences for South Africans of all colors.
Again, in a similar vein, Mr. Tupy, when the same right-wing news channel that I've just referred to, Fox News, says that President Ramaphosa is a racist when he is pursuing policies like this, again, I'm assuming that that is something that you would vehemently disagree with.
I would say that that depends on what President Ramaphosa truly believes. I am aware that there is a huge debate in South Africa as to what the president truly believes. There are a lot of South Africans who believe that he is simply saying that he's really talking about expropriation without compensation in order to appease the EFF and the left of his own party. If that is the case, if he doesn't plan for expropriation without compensation, then clearly that label would be inappropriate. If, on the other hand, he does proceed with targeting of a specific group of people for the purposes of expropriation, then that label will be correct. All depends on his behavior.
Mr. Tupy, as I'm talking to you on the screen for our audience, so we have a part of that tweet that President Trump made. He also said the South African government is now seizing land from white farmers. Is that your belief?
My understanding is that for the first time, a couple of farms in Limpopo province have been given eviction notices, or farm owners have been given eviction notices without the appropriate legal recourse. It is my understanding that the South African government is currently targeting a few farms to test the extent of the protections enjoyed by South African citizens under the Constitution. And my understanding is that this is unprecedented.
And what are you basing that understanding on, Mr. Tupy?
On news reports in South Africa that I have read in the last couple of days.
Let me push you a little bit on that, because these are incredible claims that are being made about essentially saying that white land is being seized, which I can tell you is not the case. Again, what news reports are you referring to?
I don't have it in front of me, but there have been reports about two properties, a game farm in Limpopo, where the owners had been given eviction notices without recourse to the legal system, because the government and the owners of this particular game farm, I can't remember its name, couldn't agree on a price.
But you're not really, sure of your facts, are you, Mr. Tupy? It would seem to me it seems to me that you're shooting from the hip here in this respect, basing these claims on reports that you might or might not have read.
What seems to you is completely irrelevant to me. I am talking about reports in South African media about what has happened. And obviously, if South African press is incorrect, that's one thing. But my point is that there is a system in South Africa called willing buyer, willing seller, which has served South Africa well, and which has managed to redistribute quite a lot of land over the last quarter of a century. And I think that is the path that South Africa should continue into the future.
Mr. Tupy, the State Department has now been asked to study this issue. What response do you think that the State Department should be giving in this respect?
Well, I think the State Department should do its job and use diplomatic channels to talk to our South African friends, to try to convince them not to follow the path of Zimbabwe, because it is in America's interest not to have Africa's second largest and Africa's most sophisticated economy collapse. It is in America's interest not to see 58 million South Africans destitute. And I want to emphasize this for your viewers and for your listeners. There has never been a case where land was expropriated without compensation that was not followed by economic collapse. You have to be very careful where you're going with this.
Just a final question, Mr. Tupy, and perhaps for the benefit of our audience, it's also worth reflecting on your own bona fides, if I can. Might I ask you what your relationship is with Radovan Krejcir, who is a well-known figure in the South African underworld?
None.
You have had no relationship with him at all, that you have not facilitated or helped him in any way? And again, I ask you to put that on the record for us, if you would.
No, you are talking about my namesake who lives in South Africa. I live in the United States, where I've lived since the early 2000s.
All right, so I have got that one completely wrong. I did need to check that, though.
Yes,
All right.
my name is Marian Tupy. You are missing the middle name.
Okay, I do beg your pardon for that, but it was important that I did get that on the record. We've had a couple of queries in that respect. Marian Tupy from the Cato Institute, thank you very much indeed. And